welcome to the Business Channel in association with CIBSE, the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers. Today, looking at refurbishing and retrofitting workspaces. We'll be speaking to leading players in the market, including Schüco, the world leader for energy-efficient buildings, the UK's largest cold roll-forming company, Hadley Steel Framing, Fraser, manufacturer of innovative flow, pressure and temperature control valves for waterborne heating and cooling systems, Ruskin Air Management, the market leader in the field of air distribution and fire and smoke control, and Cooltherm, pioneers in the field of ultra-efficient, low-carbon chillers for cooling buildings.
46% of UK carbon emissions come from our buildings, and of that, probably 2/3 is from homes and 1/3 is from office buildings. And one of the biggest contributors to that is the lighting that we use in our buildings and what we call the appliances, the photocopiers, the computers, the coffee makers, the machines that we plug in around the building. And they're responsible for a significant proportion of energy use in buildings. But in the older, less efficient buildings, we can use a lot of energy heating them and heating the surrounding area because they're leaky, they're not well insulated, and a lot of the heat gets out of the building. I think we're going to struggle to see a lot of zero carbon buildings in the early years. The zero carbon policy was announced back in 2007, and the economy's taken a turn for the worse since then. So there is a real question mark about how willing house builders and developers will be to build zero carbon buildings. The other thing that will affect it is that although the regulations for zero carbon homes are due to come in 2016, for other buildings they don't come in until 2019. So I don't think we'll see too many zero carbon buildings in a hurry. But in a sense, that makes energy efficient refurbishment all the more important, because we are looking at making existing buildings more energy efficient for a number of years to come.
The UK aims to move to a low-carbon economy to tackle both climate change and to reduce spending on rising energy prices. Cutting the carbon emissions of buildings will go a long way towards meeting our 80% reduction target in carbon emissions by 2050. But what solutions are available out there, and how much impact will they have on both cutting carbon and reducing energy use?
We're starting to see people think much more about how buildings will use energy and how they will perform. So people are beginning to think about what direction the building faces. And they're beginning to think about how the sun hits the building, how much sunlight gets into the building and in summer heats it up. And people are beginning to think much more about what we call passive design of buildings, so that you're making the most of energy gains from outside the building and you're trying to minimise the losses from within the building to the outside.
Schüco UK Limited offer a wide variety of products for the low carbon and retrofit market, from individual solutions for private residential applications right up to fully integrated solutions for commercial new build and retrofit. If one chooses the right combination of products in renovation or new build projects, the carbon footprint of a building could be reduced as far as 80%. If you want to take it to the extreme, there are possibilities to actually produce or to actually design and operate a carbon positive building. Usually, however, that would require a fully integrated approach to the whole building.
We make flow and temperature control valves. They go into waterborne, what we call hydronic heating and cooling systems, particularly in medium to large buildings. One of the modern trends in heating and cooling systems is the use of inverter drives on pumps and what we call two-port control valves on things like fan coils and air handling units. These are fine and great devices, which mean there is a potential for the energy consumption of the pumps to be reduced when the system's not fully occupied or when you haven't got extremes of outside air temperature. The problem though is that the pumps speeding up and slowing down and the valves opening and closing causes all kinds of chaos in the pipe system, and we need what we call pressure independent devices which can increase or decrease their characteristics or their resistance to control flow around the building effectively and efficiently. Historically, we've had problems in our building services of overrunning equipment because it was a convenient way to design systems. Our products help maximise the indoor climate control whilst minimising the energy consumption of the building plant.
It's a really important part of our business. What we're finding with one of the brands, NACO, is very recently we brought out a new product called Avengen 28, which is a new glazed louver. When we designed this product, we actually looked at it very differently to how we'd done it before. The real key element for us was looking at how we could actually reduce the carbon. And to do this, it meant we had to have much better U values than we'd had before. And we also had to look at what we were doing from a leakage point of view. We decided very early on in the design side of the product to make absolutely sure we actually got the least leakage we could get from any product on the marketplace. And we found it's been a real success for us in the last 15 months because we've got something that really hits the market.
We provide a water chilling plant for large commercial buildings in the UK, but the particular type of chiller that we offer is extremely energy efficient and can save up to 50% energy and carbon. It's different because it doesn't have any oil at all. Most traditional chillers have oil. A turbomizer chiller has no oil whatsoever. It's also got magnetic bearings. The compressor runs in a magnetic field, so it's extremely efficient. Also, the other components on the chiller have all been individually selected for their highest efficiency, which makes the entire package a very efficient chiller plant. Compared to conventional chillers, it consumes half the amount of power, which obviously is half the amount of carbon emissions.
The Hadley Group and Hadley Steel Framing in particular, we're involved in the cold rolled industry. That's cold form steel framing, basically the bending of metal. Mainly to the building trade, awful lot in window reinforcements, building envelopes, dry lining materials for internal, so anything to do with the structure of a building, we're involved. In structural steel framing, there are a lot of openings in an envelope of a building. And what we'll do, we'll work with the engineers and the main contractors and architects to find the most cost-effective way of forming those openings and handling the wind deflection issues therein. It's a very rapid method of construction. There's very, very little wastage. And because it's steel, it's not going to move when you've erected it. It's less subject to movement from temperatures. If you get timber frame, you get heat into it, it'll move around, so there's more aftercare issues, whereas you don't get that with steel framing. Plus, because it's a light gauge product, you can ship a lot of it on one wagon to site, so there's less traffic going to site, easier to offload, much better methods of construction, saves an awful lot of time on site prelims, so it's more economical.
Innovative companies are leading the way with new technologies which have the potential to reduce carbon emissions dramatically. But what are the implications of lower carbon? How will workspaces evolve? And how will buildings look different in 5 to 10 years' time?
I'm not sure exactly how they'll be different. I'm pretty sure they will be different. We've seen over the last few years changing working patterns, more flexible working, more part-time working, more people working from home, and all of those things are having an impact on the number of desks that an employer needs to provide. And quite often when people are in the office, they may not want a desk, they may need a meeting room. So the kinds of spaces we provide will be different. And inevitably everybody's mobile, so they need to be able to come in, put the laptop down, send emails, print things off, access the server, and those are things that buildings that have been around for 30 or 40 years weren't designed to do.
Flexible working is going to impact in particular the building occupancy. Now the thermal load on a building, and that's how much heating or cooling needs to be generated to keep the climate controlled, is going to vary with the number of bodies in the building. And the more diverse between high numbers and then low numbers, the more variation that air conditioning system has to be able to provide. So I think there is going to be an increased need to ensure that buildings work efficiently at what we call part load condition, rather than only being focused on operating at peak load demand.
When we talk about building and construction in the future under those impacts, clearly someone who is operating an existing building will have to look at the rentability and the attractiveness of this building in the future under these changed circumstances, which means the energy performance of the building will play a more important role for a potential client to decide on the lease, on the purchase of it. As far as flexible working is concerned, I think there are two major impacts. The increase in costs will lead to more work from home, which in return may lead to less demand for commercial space or office space, which then may lead to increased competition, and it will actually even amplify the requirement for a building to be attractive.
Well, naturally they will be more efficient, not just with chillers but with other components within the building itself. But I believe that owner-occupiers of these buildings are going to be a lot more choosy on where they want to operate from. They're going to start asking questions about, is the building I'm moving into an energy efficient building? And the ones that aren't energy efficient may get left behind.
Growingly, there is a concern over the environment and the sustainability of everything we do in our daily life. And an employer that can provide a work environment that is environmentally friendly, that is carbon neutral, I think will be able to attract better talent. Talent as in people that are concerned, that can look into the future, and that also understand that their employer has a sustainable policy, not only in the brochure but also in the way that he operates his facilities.
To help clients deal with sustainability, steel, being as recyclable as it is a vital content. Because it has so much strength to weight, you're using far less material in any build-up situation. And because it hasn't got that mass, there's less chance of sound transfer through the walls. So it actually obviates some of that sound transmittance through the walls, which is a big help.
Buildings will look the same, but I think a lot of basic engineering will change quite a lot. People will look a lot more at the energy efficiency of all the products which they're using. I think the thing that will change most in 5 years is, instead of having ventilation that's working all the time, you'll go to more demand ventilation, so it'll only be on when it's actually required. And a lot of that will do not only with the product but also with the way that the building is controlled. But I think there's also some real simple solutions which are available, but they must be done on a regular basis. One of them is we do solar shading for the outside of the building, and that's made a massive impact to actually what's used inside the building. So instead of temperatures which they were looking at controlling internally, they've been able to bring those temperatures down, so it means the size of the main air handling plant will actually be smaller than it would have been maybe 2-3 years ago.
It's a challenge to design zero carbon buildings, a very, very major challenge. The requirement for us to reduce our carbon in our existing stock remains and is even harder. However, we can make buildings work together. We no longer think of buildings on their own in cities. We start to think in the city blocks and how perhaps the demands for cooling might offset other demands for heating. So we're beginning to think of them as groups of buildings with combined heat and power linkages and district schemes to reduce carbon.
They're building a new office block behind me, so I'll talk about the noise. But the move towards a low carbon world will change the way that buildings look, feel and are used in the future. But we also need to address the huge proportion of high carbon emitting older buildings currently in use. And for these, are retrofits and refurbs the most realistic option?
Buildings are huge gas guzzlers of energy, and we need to reduce that energy use right across the building stock. So it's really important that we tackle that, both for environmental reasons but also for economic reasons, to save money on our energy bills.
Refurbishment of buildings is increasingly important. We know that the majority of the buildings that are going to be occupied by 2050 are already designed and built. So if we're going to address some of the carbon emissions objectives, then we've got to take on our current building stock, whether that's residential dwellings or commercial buildings. So we definitely see that retrofit is the priority now for the building services sector.
Retrofitting existing buildings is as important as getting the new builds correct. So there's lots of new innovation needing to be made in how we can improve the performance of those existing buildings. And a lot of that's available today and can be invested in and implemented at very attractive paybacks.
We undertook quite a big refurbishment of our offices at the institution a few years back, and we were able to plan that so that all of the work that required external access was done as one piece of work, so that we made the most of having the building scaffolded. And we also included some non-energy efficiency measures because it was cost effective to do it that way. We were also able to plan the work so that it moved around the building, and we were able to move people in turn while we worked in their particular part of the building.
One of the most recent developments that we've launched to the market is a renovation facade. That is a facade solution that basically allows you to put a completely new shell around an existing building. Through that new shell, improve basically all the characteristics of the existing building envelope. And I think the really major important part there is that that can actually be done without the building having to be vacated and without any interruption or any major interruption to operations in the building, which will have quite a significant cost effect, and it would obviously allow the decision of the building owner without having to consult or be concerned significantly with the tenant.
There are several government policy initiatives and pieces of legislation designed to kickstart the reduction of carbon emissions in the workplace. But how effective in reality have the carbon reduction commitment, the Green Deal and the renewable heat incentive been? And should the government be doing more?
Policies are vital for the implementation of these measures because it is a young market, it is young products, and it is an extremely competitive environment out there currently, following the economic contraction that we have seen and the low growth rate that we see. I think the major thing that the industry needs from policy is reliability and continuity.
For us at the moment, it's not had a massive effect. We're really very, very hopeful with the Green Deal. It's an idea that is talking about bringing energy efficiency down in an economy that's very, very difficult. It's taking the burden away from the house builder and also from the owner of the building. And if it's done right, I think it will have a real impact in the business. I do think there's maybe some things not quite right with it at the moment, but it deserves to work.
Unfortunately, most recently we have seen that some really well-working policies like the feed-in tariff have been cancelled or cut significantly, unexpectedly, leaving the industry with a lot of problems. The renewable heat incentive is once again delayed for another year until we have clarity over that. And the Green Deal, whilst I appreciate the programme and the industry appreciates the programme, I think needs a fair bit of work in the details to actually make it work.
With regards to the Green Deal, we do an awful lot of work with major architectural practices, and the most important thing that we contribute to that is by reducing the amount of material in any building and reducing the amount of time it takes to build that building. And if we can do that, that's the only real contribution we can make, because there is no other contribution. Reduce that impact on the environment, reduce that time building the building, so there's less carbon emitted, there's less time on site, there's less disruption.
The Green Deal is a potentially very, very exciting opportunity. Huge amount of challenges if we're really going to make it successful. But it does have the potential to break down those sort of boundaries between landlord and tenant. Typically, a landlord isn't going to want to upgrade their building if they have to pay for it and their tenant sees all the benefit in terms of reduced energy costs. But the Green Deal could give them access to finance, so no upfront cost to themselves, and instead that package of measures is paid for over a longer period of time. So potentially very, very helpful.
Carbon reduction commitment is clearly having an impact. It affects the roughly 3,000 biggest businesses in the UK, and they are all paying £12 per tonne of carbon that they emit. They're also having to carry out quite a detailed analysis of their emissions and submit the results of that analysis to the Environment Agency. So they're picking up quite a bit of cost in complying with carbon reduction commitment. And there's clear evidence that finance directors are beginning to ask how they can reduce the costs in terms of what they're paying and how they can reduce their emissions further.
So the government is playing its part in incentivising and encouraging businesses and organisations towards the low carbon target. But how can our featured companies help CIBSE members in achieving these objectives in their work?
Well, we've gone out and we've developed our accreditation scheme to identify the really high quality suppliers who have got a great track record of delivering energy efficient solutions. The important thing with those suppliers is to make sure that when they put forward a solution for a business, they're looking at the whole life costing of that installation, not just the upfront capital cost. That's where often businesses go wrong. They look at the upfront cost of the installation, not look at the running cost. So we make sure that these suppliers are delivering high quality solutions, but are also demonstrating why they are a strong business case for businesses.
We do a number of things. We do CPD presentations to consultants and in fact contractors too, where we explain to them the technology behind Turbomiser and give them examples of what they can do to save energy on the buildings. It is up to them to choose then the most energy efficient product for the building, but given the information, they're much more well informed.
As a business ourselves, one of the important things for us is education. It's really important that we go to people and explain what we're able to do, not just from our products, but also even from our competitors about what a difference it will make if they do certain things differently to how they work at the moment. Another thing that I think is quite important, I'm a member of a thing called CIBSE Patrons, and that's an organisation which is to do with manufacturers and main contractors, and it's very important that we're a lot more collaborative than we've been before. And what we'd really like to see with CIBSE Patrons is for CIBSE to come and talk to us a little bit more about what they're looking for from the industry. It's important that we're the people who actually bring the innovation in, but we want to bring the right innovation in and we want to do it at the right price so people are actually using it.
The advantages we offer to CIBSE members in high-rise and residential properties is that we will offer our consultancy service free of charge. They are very, very busy on these projects with so many different aspects to take into the project that we can say, give us the SFS, we will design it for you, we will tell you how it works with your hot rolled structures, with your concrete structures, all the fixings required, and we will also draw that into your drawings for you. So they find it very beneficial. It's very cost effective, saves them time on the project, and it takes a whole raft of work away from them, which we do on their behalf.
Most of us don't work in new buildings, we work in older buildings like this, and so for the UK's existing building stock, refurb and retrofit do seem to be the best options, especially in the current climate. But what do organisations need to take into consideration when thinking about making a change and drawing up their own specifications?
We can see through our experience that we should of course be buying the most energy efficient pump or the best condensing boiler or the best device available there on the market. But the reality is it's less to do with the components and much more to do with how you integrate the system together. So I would encourage a holistic approach on your hydronic or your heating and cooling systems, because several studies, including one by the Building Research Establishment last year, has demonstrated that upwards of 70% of pump energy savings can be made just by combining existing technology together in a more integrated way.
In our industry for many, many years, we've had this idea that the payback period of new technology needs to be in about 1, 2, 3 years maximum. I think we should get away from that idea. And the reason is the life of the equipment is 15 to 20 years. So why would you be considering this small portion of time? If you make the wrong decision, and you put a low cost, low efficient chiller in because it didn't pay back in 4 years, you've condemned the building to 15 to 20 years of high energy costs and high carbon. And that, in my view, is the wrong thing to do. Having said all that, turbomiser chillers that have been installed in the last 5 years, the payback is generally less than 2 years.
In having a low carbon building, it's very important to consider the materials you use. Our material is a carrier system for low carbon materials such as phenolic foam. But the beautiful part of our system is it's lightweight and it's 100% recyclable. Most of our content from electro furnaces is 91% recycled. Again, when you deliver our stuff to site, it's very lightweight, so you can get the same amount of coverage that you would get from 10 lorry loads of block work in 1 lorry load of steel work. So again, we're reducing our carbon impact on that project. I think recyclable products and lower carbon are vital. There are finite resources, and the beautiful part about steel is when you're finished with a building with steel content, you 100% recycle that steel. It's a long time we're hoping to be on this planet for, and we can't afford to waste our natural products. It's just not a possible option.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is you've got to talk to as many people as possible. It's got to be collaborative. You've got to get people right from the beginning of the design all the way through to the completion, talking at a very early start of the project. I think it's very important you should get as much advice as possible from everybody. We work very hard at making sure the specifications are right at the beginning of the project. I'll give you a really super example of a project at the moment. There's a very large job going on at the moment in London, where not only have we sat down with the building services industry, but we've actually sat down with the owner of the building, even the estate agent who's going to sell the building. So we actually understand what everybody wants on the project.
I would recommend you start with doing a post-occupancy evaluation. It's called post-occupancy because it's something that's typically done after a new building was occupied. But what it does is establish what people think of the building, what they like about it, what they dislike about it. And that gives you a thing you can then use to set a brief for a project manager. And if you do that, then you have a proper plan about when it's going to happen, you'll be moving towards the point where people enjoy your building more and you're reducing the energy use. Now, reducing the energy use saves money. Making people enjoy the building saves even more, probably by a factor of 10.
First of all, knowing what you've got. And once you know what you've got, then knowing what it's sensible and cost effective to do. We can probably make any building energy efficient. Whether we can do that in a cost effective way may be a little more open to question. So people do need to sit down and look carefully at what they've got. And this is another reason why it really needs director level thought. What do you want to do with the building? How long do you want your refurbishment to be good for? And what sort of a budget have you got? And how much work are you prepared to undertake? Because refurbishment covers a very wide range of activity. It can be replacing a few windows and putting some reflective foil behind the radiators, through to a much more radical makeover.
Planning is vital, as well as a clear vision involving all the parties. We are already reducing the carbon emissions of our existing buildings, and tomorrow brings new technologies which will take us towards the carbon reduction target. Refurb and retrofit are key, and they have the potential to create thousands, if not tens of thousands, of new jobs with the emergence of this market. If you'd like to know more about any of the organisations that we featured on this programme, then look at our website, thebusinesschannel.tv. Bye-bye for now.